Poor single dad helps stranded twin girls, unaware their father is the judge who held his fate. Marcus Rivera's hands trembled as he counted the crumpled bills in his wallet for the third time that morning, knowing the total wouldn't change no matter how desperately he willed it to. $37 stood between his 6-year-old daughter and another week of meals, and his court hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, where a judge would decide whether he keep the custodial rights that were all he had left in this world. He had no idea that the decision he was about to make on this sweltering Tuesday afternoon would change everything, or that fate had already set in motion a collision between desperation and grace that would redefine what it meant to have nothing left to lose. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Route 47 as Marcus drove his battered pickup truck home from another failed job interview, his 9th rejection in 2 weeks. His daughter Aria was waiting at his sister's apartment, probably asking when Daddy would be home. Probably wondering why they couldn't afford the art supplies her classmates brought to school. The truck's air conditioning had died 3 summers ago, and Marcus had the windows rolled down, letting the hot wind whip through the cabin as classic rock played faintly from speakers that crackled with age. He was thinking about tomorrow's hearing, about how he'd stand before some judge who'd never missed a meal, or wondered how to stretch $1 into a week. When he saw them on the side of the road, 2 small figures stood beside a sleek black Mercedes that sat at an awkward angle on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the bright afternoon sun. As Marcus drew closer, he could see they were young girls, maybe 7 or 8 years old, identical twins with dark, braided hair and matching pink sundresses. They looked terrified, their small hands clapped together as they stared at the cars whizzing past without stopping. Marcus's foot moved toward the brake before his mind could calculate the cost, before logic could remind him that he had exactly $37 and a court date that required him to look responsible and stable, not like someone who picked up stranded children on rural highways. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like this video, comment below, and share this story. Subscribe to NTTS Stories because every act of compassion matters, no matter how small it might seem in the moment. Your support helps us bring more stories of hope to the world. Marcus pulled over and climbed out of his truck, immediately feeling the girl's fear intensify as a stranger approached. He stopped several feet away and crouched down to their level, making himself less intimidating. The heat radiated off the pavement, invisible waves, and he could see that both girls had been crying, their cheeks streaked with tears and dust. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice carrying the warmth he reserved for Aria when she had nightmares. "Are you two okay? Where are your parents?" The girl on the left, whose sundress had a small butterfly pin attached to the collar, spoke first. "Our daddy's car stopped working," she said, her voice quivering. "He went to find help, but that was a really long time ago, and he told us to stay by the car, but it's so hot and we're scared." Her sister nodded vigorously, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Marcus glanced at the Mercedes and noticed the hood was slightly raised, steam no longer rising from the engine, but clear evidence of overheating etched across the dashboard visible through the windshield. Marcus looked up and down the empty stretch of highway, seeing nothing but heat shimmer and sparse trees. His phone showed 1 bar of service, and he knew from experience that calling for help out here could mean waiting hours. These girls couldn't wait hours in this heat. He thought of Aria, thought of how he'd want someone to help her if she were ever in this situation, and made his decision. "Okay, listen," he said, pulling out his phone and handing it to the girl with the butterfly pin. "I'm gonna help you, but first I want you to take a picture of me and my license plate, okay? And you can call anyone you want to let them know that Marcus Rivera is helping you. I have a daughter about your age, and I promise I'm just gonna make sure you're safe until your daddy gets back." The gesture seemed to ease their fear slightly, the transparency of it cutting through their panic. The girl took his phone with shaking hands and snapped a photo, while her sister recited his license plate number into the device. Marcus then checked the Mercedes, confirming it had indeed overheated and would need professional service. The interior was like an oven, leather seats hot enough to burn skin. He grabbed 2 water bottles from his truck, precious resources he'd bought on sale, and gave them to the girls. "Drink these slowly," he instructed. "What are your names?" "I'm Sophie," said Butterfly Pin Girl, "and this is Isabella. We're 8. Our daddy is Judge Alexander Hartwell, and he's really important, And when he comes back, he can help you if you help us." The words tumbled out in a rush, the way children speak when they're trying to convince adults they're worth protecting. Marcus felt his stomach drop at the mention of judge, but he pushed the coincidence aside. There were probably dozens of judges in the county system. For the next 40 minutes, Marcus kept the girls in the shade of his truck, giving them the granola bars he packed for his own lunch and calling the number Sophie found in their father's car for emergency contacts. Each call went to voicemail. He tried the non-emergency police line, but with the weak signal, the call kept dropping. So Marcus did what he could with what he had. He told the girls stories about Arya, about the time she'd convinced him that cookies were a vegetable because they had oats in them, making them giggle despite their fear. He taught them a hand-clapping game his mother had taught him decades ago. He made shadow puppets against the side of his truck and turned their waiting into something bearable. When a silver sedan finally pulled up behind them and a tall man in an expensive suit jumped out, his face etched with panic and relief, Marcus recognized him immediately. Judge Alexander Hartwell, the same Judge Hartwell whose nameplate would sit before Marcus tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, the man who would decide whether Marcus was fit to retain custody of Arya despite his ex-wife's lawyer painting him as financially unstable and irresponsible. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of timing. Sophie, Isabella, Judge Hartwell rushed forward, and the girls ran into their father's arms, both talking at once about the scary time and the nice man who stayed with them. The judge held his daughters tight, his eyes squeezed shut with the relief only a parent knows, and when he finally looked up at Marcus, there was raw gratitude in his gaze that transcended whatever profession distance usually existed between a judge and a defendant. "Thank you," Hartwell said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was in a dead zone for service. Had to walk nearly 3 miles before I could get a signal strong enough to call for help. By the time the tow truck driver agreed to come out here, I was losing my mind thinking about them alone on this road." He extended his hand to Marcus, who shook it, despite the surreal awkwardness of the moment. "How can I repay you? Please, let me give you something for your time. For the water and food, you have no idea what this means to me." Marcus glanced at his truck, at the $37 in his wallet that seemed to mock him with its inadequacy, at the judge who held his future in professional hands but who now stood before him simply as a grateful father. He thought about taking the money, about how it could buy Arya new shoes or help him look more put together tomorrow in court, but something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the understanding that some acts weren't transactional. "No payment necessary," Marcus said quietly. "I did what anyone should do. I have a daughter too. I'd hope someone would do the same for her." Judge Hartwell studied Marcus for a long moment, really seeing him, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, though Marcus couldn't tell if the judge knew who he was or simply understood the sacrifice of giving away food and water you couldn't easily replace. "You're a good man," Hartwell said finally. "May I at least have your name and number? I'd like to properly thank you, and I'm not standing on the side of a highway." Marcus hesitated, then pulled out one of the business cards he'd had printed back when he thought his landscaping business might actually survive his ex-wife's departure and the legal fees that followed. The card was worn at the edges, but it had his name and number. As Judge Hartwell took it and glanced down, Marcus saw the moment recognition truly hit. The judge's eyes widened slightly, and he looked up sharply, studying Marcus's face with new intensity. Tomorrow's case file must have included a photo. Tomorrow's case file probably included every failure and struggle that defined Marcus's current existence. "Tomorrow," Judge Hartwell said slowly, not as a question but as a statement heavy with realization. Marcus nodded, feeling exposed and uncertain. The judge looked down at his daughters who were now drinking from juice boxes the tow truck driver had provided, then back at Marcus. "I see," he said, and Marcus couldn't read his tone, couldn't tell if this encounter had just damned him or saved him. Before the story ends, if this touched your heart, please take a moment to comment below and tell us about a time when someone showed you unexpected kindness. Your stories inspire us all, and we read every single comment. The next morning, Marcus stood in courtroom 7 wearing his only suit, the one he'd bought at a thrift store for his sister's wedding. 5 years ago, his lawyer looked pessimistic. shuffling papers that detailed every way Marcus fell short of ideal circumstances. When Judge Hartwell entered, Marcus felt his heart hammer against his ribs, but the judge's face was professionally neutral as he took his seat and called the court to order. The proceedings began with Marcus's ex-wife's lawyer painting a picture of instability and insufficient resources, arguing that Arya deserved better than a father who couldn't hold down steady employment, who lived in a modest apartment, who couldn't provide the advantages she deserved. Every word felt like a nail in the coffin Marcus had been building for himself through circumstances and bad luck. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood and told the simple truth. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world. He was trying every day to build a better life for her, and he would never stop fighting to be the father she deserved. Judge Hartwell listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, and when Marcus finished, the courtroom fell into heavy silence. Then the judge leaned forward, his hands clasped on the bench before him, and spoke in a measured tone that carried clearly through the room. This court has reviewed all submitted documentation regarding the fitness of Marcus Rivera as a custodial parent, he began, and Marcus felt his knees weaken. Material wealth and employment status, while factors to consider, do not solely determine a parent's ability to provide for a child's well-being. Character, integrity, and the capacity for selfless love matter profoundly in these determinations. Judge Hartwell's eyes met Marcus's directly, and in that gaze was yesterday's gratitude transformed into today's justice. Mr. Rivera has demonstrated through both testimony and observed action that he possesses these qualities in abundance. This court finds that the minor child's best interests are served by maintaining primary custody with her father, and we will not disrupt a loving, stable parent-child relationship based solely on temporary financial hardship. Custody remains with Marcus Rivera, with standard visitation rights granted to the mother. The gavel came down, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. Tears he'd been holding back for months finally breaking free. His lawyer was shaking his hand, saying something about appeals being unlikely, about this being a decisive victory, but Marcus could only look at Judge Hartwell, who nodded once with the weight of yesterday's highway encounter between them, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes justice and mercy walk the same path. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that kindness creates ripples we can't always see, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to NTT Stories. Your engagement helps stories like Marcus's reach people who need to hear them most. Leave a comment about what this story meant to you, because your voice matters in this community we're building together. That evening, Marcus picked up Arya from school himself, no longer having to coordinate complicated schedules through his sister. His daughter ran into his arms with the unself-conscious joy of childhood, unaware of how close they'd come to losing their daily moments together. As they drove home past Route 47, Marcus thought about Sophie and Isabella, about Judge Hartwell who'd seen beyond a case file to the human being underneath, about how one decision to stop and help had created a chain reaction that saved his world. He thought about the $37 still in his wallet, slightly more now after he'd finally found a landscaping contract that started next week, and he made a promise to himself and to Arya. When they had more than enough, they would always stop for those who had less, because he understood now in his bones that kindness was never wasted, that every act of compassion rippled outward in ways we couldn't predict or measure. Sometimes the people we help are exactly the people who hold our fate in their hands, and sometimes they're not. But it never matters, because helping isn't about what comes back to us. It's about who we choose to be when no one's watching, when the cost is high and the reward uncertain, when being decent is simply the right thing to do despite everything else falling apart around us. That was the lesson Marcus would teach Arya, the inheritance more valuable than money or status. And as they pulled into their small apartment complex, father and daughter headed inside together, their future finally secure, not because of wealth or circumstance, but because one man chose compassion on a hot Tuesday afternoon, and another man chose to honor that compassion when it mattered most.